Hello, I am Heidi, and welcome to Heidi's Lemonade Stand, where we talk to real people and share true stories of overcoming life's challenges. We are taking life's lemons and making lemonade. Thank you for joining me. Hi, Shelly. Welcome to Heidi's Lemonade Stand. I'm looking forward to getting to know you. So start out by telling me just like a couple of little facts about yourself.
Well, thanks, Heidi, first of all, for having me on. A couple interesting little facts was, I guess, number one, I was the first female to graduate with a manufacturing engineering degree from BYU. It's kind of cheating by saying that because I was in the second class, but anyway, I still number one. And then I enjoy woodworking. And a friend of mine who is like a 80-year-old guy at this point, a few years ago, taught me how to turn on the lathe. And I've gotten into making pens. And some of the pens that I've made are beautiful. And one of my favorite woods that I use is from tree trimmings from olive trees in Jerusalem that are 2,000-year-old trees. Wow. So that's kind of fun. And I love sports. I was a 3-sport athlete, which, for those that are on the podcast, they can't see me. I'm no longer a 3-sport athlete, but I grew up playing basketball, volleyball, softball. But now I'm a mom, a grandma, and an aunt to many. So
that's the good life there too. So that's okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so finish this sentence. If someone really knew me, they would know.
They would know that I love my life regardless of what's happened or what is happening.
I love that. That's great. A life lover. That's awesome. Well, good. Well, you gotta take me back then and tell me your lemon to lemonade story and why you love life so much.
For starters, I grew up in a home with an alcoholic father. He had a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. There was violence in the home to the point that it escalated when I was 15, that my dad ended up murdering my mother and burning our house down. So, and then things got worse, if you can believe that. So, but basically, he killed her before the fire and then set the fire to cover up the crime. But it took a long time for the evidence to evolve. I was 15 at the time and my sister was 17. And this happened in October. My dad wasn't arrested until February of the next year. We had to bail him out of jail. And we were living with him the whole time, mind you. And then his trial was not for another 2 years. So it was 2.5 years. My sister and I knew from the moment that it happened that he was guilty because we knew the patterns. But we wanted to believe his story because we had just lost everything. We didn't want to lose him too and what was left of our family. And when you grow up in domestic violence, there's a sense of normalcy of the violence. And so you're used to it and you think that it's normal. And so there really isn't, there's fear. It's hard to explain. There's this underlying fear, this underlying walking on eggshells all the time, waiting for the shoe to drop. But yet at the same time, it's your normal. So you just, it's comfortable and you just live in it.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is even what else happens is because you're trained to keep secrets, right? So you assume that everyone else is doing the same thing you are when they're not. And this is some maybe, but fundamentally you live behind a facade. And I lived in a very upscale suburban neighborhood in the suburbs of Detroit. In the night of the fire, they actually had my house in a blaze on the 11 o'clock news on all the major networks. I was reading about my life in the Detroit News and Free Press and the local Farmington Observer. I grew up in Farmington Hills, which is a suburb of Detroit. So for 2.5 years, no one was telling me anything. And I was learning about my life in the newspaper. Living with my dad, he became abusive towards my sister, and it just spiraled out of control from there. I just finished publishing my memoir, Beautiful Ashes, and I take 12 hours to tell my story, so we're going to get a very truncated version on this, but there's a lot to my story. But what I've found is that also as being a child of domestic violence and learning this silence and this pattern of abuse and not speaking up, it set me up to be victimized in other ways. So I'm also a survivor of molestation and multiple rapes. And all this happened in my childhood. And so I've had to overcome all those things, plus a whole host of other things throughout my life. But there's a way through it all. That's what I've found. Hard things don't have to defeat you. It took me a very long time to learn that. A lot of struggle, a lot of pain, a lot of depression, a lot of, even suicidal moments, until I learned that I could get the right help. I had started getting therapy in college, just regular talk therapy for all this trauma. And I did talk therapy on and off for about 15 years, and I was still miserable. I was still praying to die every day. And so in my mid 30s, I found a great trauma therapist who did some other techniques that at the time weren't mainstream. I'm 52 now, so this was almost 20 years ago. I was doing EMDR and NET, which actually worked better for me, which is neuro-emotional technique. I would say neuro-emotional technique actually saved my life. That, along with working on my relationship with God. When you experience trauma, especially as a child, it gets stuck. If you don't process it correctly, which it's impossible to process some of these things correctly, especially as a child, your body naturally stores it somewhere. And you may not consciously even remember everything that you've stored, because you store all these little events. You store, the first time you felt unlovable. That might have happened. For me, it happened when I was a toddler. And, as an adult, when you're reflecting, 30 years into the past, you might not be able to articulate a specific event. But NET uses muscle testing along the acupuncture meridians, and it allows you to timestamp events that where you've stored these negative emotions. And it might not be a catastrophic event like, your house burning down. It can be a bullying event. It can be just where you've planted all these negative seeds in your history, whatever they are.
Well, and it can sometimes be even before the big event that you remember. It will most likely be kind of a smaller event that gave you that stamp than the big event that you remember.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's a history,
yeah.
Right? And it's an evolutionary history, and it's a pattern that starts with very small things. And you keep building up you keep reinforcing that negative thought. Like, let's say you plant the seed at 3 years old because of an event that happened at 3 years old that you weren't lovable. Well, then your unconscious mind is constantly looking for opportunities to validate that thought. So then at 5 years old, some other, you're at a birthday party and something happens, and now you've reinforced that negative thought. And so you do this throughout your entire life. What I found NET helpful for me, even more than EMDR, was that I was so numb from all the trauma that I experienced that I couldn't articulate my feelings the way that you need to and visualize when you're doing EMDR. And so what NET felt like to me was my conscious mind talking to my unconscious mind or my spirit, where your spirit remembers everything and stores everything. And so through this muscle testing, it allows you to identify and then release all these things. And it's not a one-time event. Like I did this when I started figuring out that this was working for me. I started going twice a week, and I did this for 2.5 years so that I could process all of this horrendousness that I had experienced and reset my mind. And I literally, and like I said, at the same time, I always believed in God, but I didn't trust him because I had been violated by so many men and I couldn't trust. So in the same process of healing with the therapy, I also learned how to trust in God, trust in his plan for me, apply the atonement, because that's another thing that people, it's really easy to see that the atonement applies for the forgiveness of sin, but it's hard to learn how to apply it to heal you from suffering. It is possible. I was praying to die every day, and not for a short period of time, for several years, because mind you, I'm in my mid-30s. My whole faith is based around eternal families. The only thing I wanted when I lost my family was a family. Well, I'm in my mid-30s. I'm not married. As a matter of fact, I hadn't had a date in 7 or 8 years at that point. So I was miserable. I didn't have any reason to be miserable. I had just finished my master's degree. I had gotten my MBA. I had a very successful career. I had my own home. I was living with my best friend, who basically is my adopted sister. Her family is my family. I had 2 dogs that were like my children. On the outside, my life was great, but on the inside, I was still miserable. So I went from praying to die every day to happy and whole. It wasn't a light switch, but when it happened, it was a light switch. I learned a lot through that process. And I've learned a lot through adversity. I learned that I needed to stop asking the question, why? Why is this happening to me? And I started asking, what and how? What am I supposed to be learning from this? And how do I use that to help myself and others? Because for me, life has always been about helping others. It's just who I am, because I always say life is a team sport. We're here to help each other. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, and we're all needed and necessary. And I also learned that there's more equality in adversity than you think there is. I know that Heavenly Father loves me and you and everybody the same. If you're a parent and you have children, you don't have a favorite child. You love them all the same. You want them all to succeed. The things that we experience in life give us opportunity for growth. We're here to learn to gain the characteristics of Christ. And, how do you learn patience? How do you learn long suffering, endurance, charity, empathy, compassion, all of these attributes? It's not a rose garden to learn those lessons, but we're all going to learn them differently. but we all have to learn them. So we're all going to be pushed to our limit. Whatever your limit is, you're going to be pushed to your limit. Whatever my limit is, I'm going to be pushed to my limit to learn those exact same lessons. For me, I just look at adversity as an opportunity for growth if we choose to make it that way. I mean, it definitely can destroy you. It's destroying millions. It can be an opportunity, and you can't compare yourself to anybody else because nobody has it easy. Nobody. And nobody has it easier than you do. But at your darkest time is equivalent to you as my darkest time is equivalent to me. And that's really all that matters.
Right.
That's why we just need to love each other.
Right. I love how how is this helping me and helping others? That's a really big part of it, is we need to learn that sometimes we go through stuff to help other people as well. And so you sharing your story is helping others. So what is your lemonade now?
Is to help as many people as I possibly can. My number one goal for writing my memoir, it's my number one goal for talking on podcasts. It's my number one goal for being on social media. I try to give inspirational quotes and my life lessons around those inspirational quotes like 3 times a week, because I just want to be there for people so that they can see that somebody has overcome some of the worst things that can happen in life, and give others hope. And that's my goal. And I love people. I have empathy for others, and I really do care.
I love that. Well, and we probably need to go back because you mentioned that you were single for a long time, but then at the beginning you said you have kids and grandkids. So maybe we skipped a part.
Yeah, after I met my husband at 40, we got married a little over a year later, and he had 4 kids from a previous marriage. So yeah, we have kids, and then my adopted family, I have tons of nieces and nephews. Well, actually 1 niece from there and many nephews, and I try to be the favorite aunt. I think I succeed most of the time. I spoil them.
Yeah, great goal. I love that. So you're still close with your sister. What happened with your dad?
Well, I had to be the star witness at the prosecution, which is a whole nother story.
Oh my
And so I spent like 8 hours on the stand giving testimony that was excruciating. Mind you, I'm 17 years old. I didn't find out until a few days, not less than a week before I had to testify, that I had to even testify. And then I found out 2 days before I had to testify that I was testifying for the prosecution, which in this meeting with the prosecuting attorney, I learned all these damning details that proved that my dad had done what I knew he had done, that I was in denial about for 2 years. Not only did I have to testify, I had to go home with him after they were using me to prove first-degree murder. So that was an interesting experience. I was having such a hard time. The judge kept yelling at me to speak up. So eventually at one point he called a recess, asked the jurors to leave, so it would make it easier for me to answer these questions. Every event that I testified about, as far as his history of threatening and his actions of how many times I was involved in physically stopping my dad from strangling my mother or trying to rip her tongue out or all these things, the jury never heard it, because my dad's lawyer got the judge to throw all that testimony out, because I couldn't say that it happened on a Tuesday on this date, however many years earlier. So he got convicted of second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder and arson. He got a total of 13 years.
Wow.
Well, he died in prison of cancer. His trial was in February. He went to jail in March of 88, and he died in July of 97. But I mean, and this happened a month shy of their 25th wedding anniversary. Now, mind you, the abuse started in the beginning. The adversity hasn't really stopped. I've had a lot of medical issues in my life too. So there's there's stuff that have happened that I couldn't even put in the book because it was just too much. I mean, like I spent 2 months of my senior year in high school in a body cast for my back. I didn't even mention that, you know, and it's already almost 400 pages. Yeah. So.
Well, and I even joke with people like, yeah, you're sharing your lemon to lemonade story as if it's a one-time thing, you know? It's like, I know there's more lemons to lemonade. Like, we're not being naive about that. Like, oh, is this one experience in my life and I overcame it and life has been wonderful ever since? I know that's not the case, but I just admire people who are willing to share some of their hardest things. And this is a lot, and I appreciate you being so open and sharing where you've come, and it's incredible. You're just giving encouragement and inspiration to anybody who might be listening that can just go, I can do this. Like, if she can do this, I can do this.
I'm wearing a shirt that nobody can see that says
that shirt.
Everything will be okay. That's the theme of my message, is that everything will be okay. Let me just give you an idea of why that's my theme. Right after my mom died, I told you at the beginning I was a 3-sport athlete. Well, my mother never ever missed any event I ever was in. So I went back to school eventually. I took like 2 weeks off, and my first basketball game back, I was a guard, and I was really good at stealing the ball. We were at an opposing team's gym. I stole the ball right before halftime. I'm driving the lane, and I hear my mother's voice in the stands. And she's cheering for me. And so because I hear her, I look. And when I look, I see her and I feel her. Of course, I completely brick the shot because I'm thinking I'm losing my mind. You know, I'm a 15-year-old kid. This sensation comes over me. I hear my mother's voice, Shelly, I love you, and everything will be okay. I go into the locker room. I say nothing. I tell nobody because I think if I tell anyone, they're going to think I'm crazy. Well, about 6 weeks later, the first Christmas that my mom is gone, and I go to the mall. My mom loved shoes and handbags. And so her favorite store was Baker's. So I'm walking past Baker's in the mall, Christmas shopping, and I'm miserable because at this point, my dad had moved us into my best friend growing up's house. I could look out the window and see my burned out house. And a step beyond that, my dad started sending me there to get canned goods out of the basement, which is it's a horror show. But so things are going worse and worse and worse, right? So I'm in the mall and I look across and I swear I saw my mom in Baker's, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I run around this bench. I go into the store. Nobody's in there. Not even the workers. They were in the back of the room. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, Shelly, you're losing your mind. So I start walking out of the store. This sensation comes over me. My mother's voice, Shelly, I love you, and everything will be okay. That's the second time this happens. Again, I tell nobody. Another month goes by. I'm, by this point, miserable, having reoccurring nightmares, not sleeping, and I'm laying on my left side, actually, facing with my back to the door in my bed, and my room starts to light up. I roll over thinking I'm going to see my sister coming in the door. No. This light was filling my room. Within the light, there stood my mother. I felt her. And again, Shelly, I love you, and everything will be okay. And then the light closed, and she was gone. So that's why I wear this shirt. And purple is her favorite color.
Everything will be okay. That's an amazing message. I love that that would be the message that your mom would tell you. That's beautiful. And it's true.
Yeah.
It really is. You go through hard things, but everything's okay.
Yep.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Ooh. Thank you for sharing your light. I appreciate it. You've changed my life.
I'm just trying. There's so much good that can be had by me sharing my story, because it's not normal.
Wow, I am so sorry. You have had quite the experience, and I just admire you. I just look at you, and nobody would ever know, right? Just seeing you, and you're happy, and your light, and what you're giving to the world. I'm sure people are shocked when you tell your story, and I'm so grateful that you had the wisdom and the bravery to write it. So what's the name of your book?
Beautiful Ashes.
Okay.
It's it's even a longer story than that. Well, thank you for having me.
I have enjoyed spending this time with you. You might have a friend struggling with the same thing that we talked about in this episode that might enjoy listening to this too. So please share this episode, because no one is alone at the lemonade stand.